All right, everyone. Link in the description. Archived, of course. Trump has begun to reassert federal authority in Washington, D.C. A bunch of drug dealers and illegals have been arrested overnight, actually. This is a good thing. By the way, it is not only constitutional, technically speaking, it's a constitutional obligation for Congress and for the President of the United States. The whole goal of DC, and when people push for DC statehood, they're just being morons. They don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand the premise behind why Washington, D.C. actually exists in the first place. The whole idea was to have an area where Congress could convene, the president could hold office, the judiciary could operate, and it was separate from state authority. The problem is if you incept DC as a state, let's say you have a full-on state government instead of the city government you have currently, which is currently being superseded by Trump, and they're all salty about it, which is hysterical. The states under the 10th Amendment have wide latitude with regards to things like policing, districting, infrastructure, and so forth. And so you would have a state entity that effectively would be superseding the federal government. The idea was to have effectively a separate area where the federal government could operate and they wouldn't be perturbed by any particular state power because they needed to operate. Now, has the federal government slipped its leash and gone way goddamn beyond what it's supposed to be? Yeah. Effectively, originally, it was meant to be mostly a night watchman state, sort of monarchist in character more than anything else. It was meant for the executive to, for example, be the general of the military, be the leader of the military, the commander-in-chief, and, appoint, the militia as necessary, National Guard, which is what Trump is using, by the way, which is hysterical. Whether it be organized or disorganized militia means absolutely nothing. You had the commander-in-chief conducting diplomacy, then you have Congress, which makes laws, and supposedly this is supposed to function. Did for a while. It's gotten a little bit derelict of late. And then you have the judiciary, which judges whether the law is even legal or not, and stuff like that. The idea was that they could do this encapsulated in a federal district separate from any state. By the way, I would note that part of DC has already been ceded to Virginia. Personally, I agree with Trump's decision to clean up DC. The idea is that if you're going to have meaningful diplomacy and all of these other things, and have a capital that is actually, livable, have a capital that is actually refined and beautified and so forth, you're going to need to get rid of the scumbags. There are cartel members running around, you got rampant shootings and all sorts of other things. I love it when they say, well, DC is not as violent as these other cities. No, DC doesn't have as many shootings as Chicago. Wow, that's great. What wonderful news. It's slightly safer than Chicago or Los Angeles. It's been a problem for decades. DC has had high crime this entire time. I noticed that crime all of a sudden becomes an issue to some liberal commentators also as soon as Donald Trump gets elected. Hmm, strange. What a coincidence. Hmm. We be clanking. But yeah, DC does need to be cleaned up. So if you can get a few dozen criminals off the street in a sweep one night, well, that makes them all marginally safer. I would think that the people of DC, by the way, although they tend to lean heavily, heavily to the left, I would think that at least on this particular issue, they would generally agree with the Trump administration. Nobody wants to live in a neighborhood that's getting fired full of bullets every single night, now do they? Most people would rather live in a safe neighborhood. If they don't, then there's probably a reason for that, because they're probably the one holding the gun. Trump is doing, effectively, his constitutional duty. He is supposed to execute the law. The law of the land is that the federal government must remain isolated from state control. It must, of necessity. If Congress were to convene it, like let's say that DC was simply gobbled up by Maryland or something like that, politicians would be more hard pressed to get their booze, I suppose. Considering their alcohol laws down there, it's a semi-dry state more than anything else. You have to have a state-run liquor store. It'd be funny to see them scramble for legislation about that to have like a congressional liquor office or something like that. John Boehner once said that the stench of alcohol was absolutely revolting. That one time that they had the budget showdown, the lockdown, actually, with the government, that was 2013, I think it was, or something like that. It was very, very funny at the time. 2014, actually, I believe. Anyway, if you were to have DC absorbed into a state, then it means that the state legislature could effectively countermand Congress. What if the state says, nah, we're closing this road? Yeah, I'm sorry that you can't get to work. You can't convene the federal government. Giving a state power over the DC region would be a real big problem. Although I would note, technically speaking, the states of Virginia and Maryland, if they were in agreement, could technically blockade DC entirely on their own end of the roads and things like that. But then DC, of course, has its own airport, so I guess there'd be a lot more air travel in and out of Dulles. It's funny to think about, but none of these things are gonna happen. DC's not gonna fall under state control. That's never gonna happen, and it shouldn't. And watching Trump clean out the city to make the capital better makes sense. Other cities, they don't have the same problem. This is our national capital. Now, is it a den of thieves and shit anyway? Yeah, most of the people in Congress are scumbags. Most of the people that operate in the federal courts there, they're scumbags. The lawyers are scumbags. The bureaucrats are scumbags. We all know this. Many of them don't live inside of the Beltway anyway. We all know that DC is a den of iniquity. But if you're going to have a den of iniquity, which you're going to have with any national capital anyway, it makes sense to at the very least keep the crime rate low so that when you have other corrupt people from other countries visiting you to talk to you, you don't have a bunch of fentanyl addicts sleeping on the ground outside. That's about all. Peace out.